Hello everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of The Master Show. Do you know what is the best gift you can give yourself? That is teaching yourself the ability to be on your own. To do all your work by yourself and improve yourself so much that you can handle yourself in any situation. Now, in this journey of improving your maths marks, also, first of all, you had to embark on a self improvement journey which focuses completely on yourself. Now, this might sound a little bit selfish, but I will tell you what one of my teachers have told me. You can't help a drowning person while you're standing on a slippery rock. What this means is, if you want to help someone, first of all, you have to help yourself be in a stronger position where you can lend a hand to another person. So, let's see how you can improve yourself all on your own and be ready to help the others as well in this episode. In this episode, I'm going to teach you how can you do your studies on your own, and for this I'm going to teach you about 4 frameworks, 4 methodologies which you can approach your studies in. Some of them are old and tested methods, some of them are what I have kind of modified and invented, and some of them are modern techniques of studying. The first method I'm going to take you through, we will call it as the classical methodology. So what is this classical methodology? That is the traditional setup our schools are following at the moment. Like, we have taken a lesson set for 1 year and we divide it into 3 semesters or 3 terms and we study them one by one. So this is a more of a very traditional approach, and if you are a person who wants to stick with the usual and tested methodology, this is the method for you. I will recommend this for anyone who is above average. I wouldn't recommend this for anyone who is below average or starting as a beginner. So the approach is pretty straightforward. If you have 30 lessons for a year, you split it into 3 semesters. The first semester you study 10 lessons, second another 10 lessons, third another 10 lessons, and then you go in the order of the textbook. How you have to evaluate yourself, how you have to check yourself is, at the end of each chapter, you do a small exercise to check whether you understood the lesson and also to practice some questions. And likewise, after you finish the chapters relevant for one semester, you go through one major exam. You can use the existing term test past papers to study. So this is a very traditional and a usual and more popular method which you might already be following. This will work, not that there are any complaints about the method, but this is not something you have to follow if you are an average or a below average student. This method is fairly good enough for above average students. So the second methodology, I call it as the lean methodology. Actually, in management, we study a concept called lean management. So what happens in lean management is, we do not try to create the final product at once. We do it by incremental steps. We create a prototype and then we improve it a little bit, then again we improve it another time. So with a repeated cycle, with a repeated set of cycles, we improve the product step by step. I have sort of taken this approach which I studied during my degree, and I have tried to include it into the studying setup. In the last episode, I have already talked about how we can categorize maths into some major categories. What you have to do is, you have to take each category and you have to divide each category into 3 difficulty levels, like beginner, medium and advanced. So you have, in numbers section, you take the beginner side, and then medium, and then advanced part. And algebra, again you go for beginner, medium, advanced. Likewise, each of those categories you split it into 3. Every lesson, like if you take fractions, there will be an easy part, there will be an average part, there will be an advanced part. Equations, there will be easy part, there will be an advanced part, there will be also an average part. So what you do is, in the first round, you study the easy parts of each lesson. So from fractions, you study the easy part, make sure you're good with it. Then you move on to equations, you study the easy part, then you move to the next one. Likewise, every chapter in the first incremental round, you only study the easy parts and you make sure that you're good with handling the easy parts. Once you finish all the categories in easy mode, then you start the second cycle. The second cycle where you go on ahead with the average parts of each lesson. Fractions, average parts, and equations average part, geometry average parts, the medium level questions. And then the second cycle completes, and then finally you go for the last part where you try to do the advanced questions in each chapter. So this, I call it as the lean method of studying or methodology, the framework. This is ideally good for anyone who is below average. That means if you are a person who is starting to study maths, or if you are a person who is like almost average but not above average, this is a wonderful method for you. It will work for others as well, but this is the method I would recommend for people who are below average. The third methodology we are going to see today is known as the Saxon methodology. Now, I have heard this a lot from different students. Like they say, when they are doing the lesson during the class or school, they understand the lesson, they do the sums really well. But once they move on to the next lesson, they forget completely about the previous lesson which they were really good at. And when they come to the exams, they have no knowledge of the lessons which are supposed to come for the exam. So if you are in this category, and also if you are like above average student, then this third methodology will be the ideal solution for you. So let's say there are 10 lessons you want to study, and starting with fractions, then equations, and then triangles. In the Saxon methodology, what you do is you study fractions the first lesson, and then after that you do an exercise relevant to fractions. Then you move on to the second lesson, equations, and once you finish equations, you do an exercise which contains questions from equations as well as the previous lesson, which is fractions. And then once you move to the third one, you finish the third chapter, and then you do an exercise which includes questions from the previous two lessons, which is going to be fractions as well as equations and triangles. In this method, the main use is whenever you finish a chapter, you do not only revise that particular chapter, but you revise the previous chapters as well. Even though at the beginning it might feel a little bit tiring as well as a little bit complicated, this is a wonderful way for you all to remember your previous lessons throughout the semester or throughout the year. This is going to be a very wonderful method, as I said, for any student who is above average or any student who has that issue of forgetting a lesson once it is completed. The fourth method of studying is what we call as the reverse engineering method, or we will call it as the reverse examination method. So this is something I kind of modified from an engineering concept called reverse engineering. In a very simple term, what do you mean by reverse engineering is, now usually when you make a product, they have an idea, they develop the concepts, they develop the designs, and then they finally create the product. For an example, say Apple creates a new iPhone. That's called as engineering. Whereas what happens in reverse engineering is, once they release their product, some companies who wants to rip off this product in China or some other country will take the latest iPhone and they will break it apart. The product will be disassembled into all the parts, and they will try to get the technology behind this latest iPhone. This is called as reverse engineering. So we can apply the same concept for studying as well. So normally what do? We study the lessons in order to do the exam, but the reverse studying method is you do the exam in order to study the lessons. I will explain you how that works. Say suppose you want to study for the grade 10 exam. You take a grade 10 examination paper, and there are 25 short questions which you have to give about 2 minutes each. You start with 5 of them. For a day you start with 5 questions. Try all 5 of them, giving yourself 2 minutes each. And once you finish it, do mark the paper using the marking schemes available in the end of the past paper books most of the time. You can mark the papers. Say out of the 5 questions, you got 2 of them correct, 3 of them wrong. Forget about the 2 of the questions, you got them correct. You got them correct, so you don't have to bother about them. Take the 3 questions which you got wrong, and for each of those questions, try to get the relevant notes, the relevant exercises from the textbook, your tudes, wherever you can find, and try to learn how to do that question correctly. And for that 2-minute question, sometimes you might have to spend 50 minutes to study about it, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes even hours to study how to do that question. It doesn't matter. Spend as much as time you want to understand how to do that question, and then repeat for the next question. Likewise, try to make sure the wrong questions from them, try to learn the chapter which they are relevant to and get the idea of how to do those questions. The advantage of this particular method is you don't have to study tons of chapters in order to do the exam. You can skim through the unwanted parts, the unnecessary parts, but at the beginning you will feel a little bit uneasy not to know the full chapter, just learning a part of it. At the beginning there will be a little bit of discomfort in it, but as you go, you will find this method much more productive and exam oriented than any other methods. So I do not recommend this method for below average students because you need to have somewhat of knowledge in your lessons in order to do this. But this can be a wonderful method for anyone who is above average, and also for people who are like above 80 marks range in the exam. This would be a wonderful method if you want to step up your game and reach your 90s, 95s and even 100. This would be wonderful because it saves a lot of time. You don't have to study the unnecessary parts or less important parts in the lesson, and you can directly get into the parts which will affect your final marks. So that is my 4 methods for you to study and revise maths. Now, some of these methods can be used for other subjects as well. So I explain how to use this to study maths specifically. And what I want you to do is, you have to first of all pick the methodology which you like. So at the beginning, you might think the method 1 will work, but you might turn out to find out that the method 4 is what suits you. So you have to test it, trial run it, you have to go with the methods which you feel comfortable at. Don't try to use a method just because you like it. Also try whether it is practically working for you, because it all depends on your personal preferences as well. And feel free to modify any of these. You can combine 2 of these methodologies. You can mix and match and play around with these. I have just given you an idea about the 4 main methodologies I actually recommend, and even you can kind of create a new one out of this. It doesn't matter. What matters is, whatever the methodology you choose out of this, you have to be consistent and you have to put in the work. And as I said at the beginning of the lesson, you have to improve yourself. You have to you have to improve yourself, and you have to put yourself on track, and you have to feel confident that you are going to do this work alone and without much help from others, that you can actually continue this journey. Because if you do that, if you get into that track of self-improvement, then and only then you will be able to get to the next step of this particular process, which I will be explaining in the next episode of The Master Show. Till then, signing off with love, Rizlan Hassan.